My name is Ralph Ben-Murgy, and I host a podcast called Not That Kind of Rabbi. Basically, what I'm doing is looking for the spirit in people, what animates them to do what they do, and the kinds of stories they can tell. You know, people believe they don't have a story. Oh, no, I don't really have much of a story. And then when you talk to them or ask them questions, you'll find out everybody has a story and that they're all wonderful. I think it's a really good idea for us not to become parochial, not to just think of ourselves, the Jewish people this, the Jewish people that. So many people of different faiths and different inclinations have so much to offer to us as Jews, but also to the world in general. So I tend to look for the spark in people more than I look for the affiliation in them. To support our work at the CJN, go to thecjn.ca/donate. And if you're Canadian, you'll even get a tax receipt.
And I, Rachel Bendayan, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully and to the best of my skill and knowledge execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Official Languages and Associate Minister of Public Safety.
That's what it sounded like on Parliament Hill Friday after a big day in politics when Montreal Liberal MP Rachel Bendayan was sworn in to the Trudeau cabinet during a shuffle. She's the first Sephardi Jewish woman of Moroccan background ever to hold a Canadian cabinet post, but it's unclear how long she might hold that new job. As calls have been coming for the Prime Minister to step down, the opposition wants to try a non-confidence vote in the House of Commons before the end of January. And all this happening after a political bombshell went off in Ottawa with the resignation of Chrystia Freeland, the finance minister, accusing the Trudeau Liberals of wasting time on gimmicks like the GST tax break instead of dealing with the threat of Donald Trump imposing severe tariffs on Canadian imports to the United States when he becomes president in just a few weeks. So will this be the last Hanukkah with Justin Trudeau sitting as a prime minister? And how has the antisemitism explosion in Canada and the fallout from the ongoing Israel-Gaza war since October 7th impacted the political scene in this country this year?
We've seen some amoral and almost immoral equivocations from the current government on the post-October 7th world, without a doubt.
I'm Ellen Basner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, December 23rd, 2024. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News and made possible in part by the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky Gluskin Charitable Foundation.
My name is Rivka Campbell, and I am the host of the CJN podcast, Rivkush. My podcast is a focus on Jews of color talking about anything. It's really important for mainstream Jews to see that I am just as Jewish as you. The topics that interest you also interest me. I want to talk about Israel. You want to talk about Israel. I want to talk about food. Maybe it's not the food you want to talk about, but I want to talk about food. It's important that the person talking about Judaism, Israel, whatever, has a face like mine. It really, hopefully, changes the perception of Jews of color. To support my podcast and the rest of the CJN, please make a tax-deductible donation at thecjn.ca/donate.
It's been hard to keep up with all the breaking political news coming out in recent days. Could any of it been predicted before? And what should Canadian Jews expect in the 2025 new year? Joining us now are our CJN Daily Political Panel. David Birnbaum in Montreal, a former Liberal MNA for the riding of Darcy McGee in the Quebec National Assembly. Emma Cunningham is in Pickering, Ontario. She's a former NDP riding president who quit the party over antisemitism. She's now a school trustee in Durham Region, but she's speaking here for her own personal views and not for the school board. And Stephen Adler, senior director with National Public Relations, who has deep ties as a Conservative Party strategist. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello there. Good morning.
Who wants to talk about the unexpected drama that's happened this year? Before we do, though, I want to play a piece of tape where you predicted this was going to happen, but you were a year too early. In 2022, you said,
in addition to what has been said, I actually think we're going to see a major Trudeau cabinet minister resign from cabinet in the House of Commons in the first half of 2023.
wait, who's going to be Marco Mendicino or Ahmed Hossein or Alhabra?
It could be them. It could be Madame Freeland.
I think that despite his ego, which will try to get in the way, the Prime Minister will allow a new leader, and thus for at least a little while, a new Prime Minister to sit by the end of 2023.
Who's going to be the new Prime Minister and the new Liberal leader? You didn't say who it was.
Chrystia Freeland.
So 2 years ago, you said it was going to be Chrystia Freeland is going to leave. And then last year you said, don't count Trudeau out. So we have to start with you. Your predictions were right, but a year late.
So it was wise words that I've obviously said to our CJN listeners over the last couple of years. Let's be very honest. A week ago, no one predicted that the Prime Minister of Canada was going to demote the Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister, that the Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister would think about it over the weekend, and then early Monday morning phone the Prime Minister's office and say, I need to speak to the Prime Minister and drop this bombshell. Let's be very honest. No one saw this coming. It has sent Canada into a tailspin, resulting in the need for a massive cabinet shuffle, questioning of what's going on, etc. And I'm just shocked that it happened this week. I didn't see it coming. I don't think anyone saw it coming Monday morning. And I am gobsmacked that the Prime Minister's office didn't anticipate this reaction. You don't speak to someone, to use a sports analogy, you don't speak to someone, bases loaded, 2 out, bottom of the ninth, and say, we need you to hit a base hit to score the tying and winning run. And oh, by the way, we're sending you to the minor leagues right after the game.
The thing that I would jump in with is that I think it's been pretty public knowledge, or at least highly rumored, that Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau were at odds over this budget. And it sounds like she was really unhappy with the decisions he was pushing her to make. So while I wasn't expecting her to drop the kind of bombshells that she did, I'm not shocked that she chose not to deliver a budget that it was at least rumored she was unhappy with. I also think with a lot of people believing that Trudeau is on a sinking ship, she may be choosing to dissociate herself with that, because if he does resign, I wouldn't be surprised at all if she put her name in the mix to replace him.
I don't think one has to be a conspiracy theorist to envisage the possibility, and I'm not sure I'm going to put it forth with any certainty, but the possibility that both the Prime Minister and the former Finance Minister knew that this is where we would be today. And let me explain how it might be in the interest, the dwindling interest of the current Prime Minister and the interests of Chrystia Freeland to have us where we are today. Rather despicable, because the country is being held as hostage as a result. But Chrystia Freeland would now be in a position, depending on the coming scenarios, to run for the leadership, having let go of the Trudeau baggage that would have made her an unlikely winner in a leadership, let alone a coming election. As far as Justin Trudeau is concerned, there are 2 or 3 or innumerable scenarios possible. One, which is that he prorogues government, which is the only way that we don't go to an election unless next couple of months, given Jagmeet Singh's announcement today. And it's the prerogative of the sitting government to prorogue, that is, delay that restarting of Parliament at any time. The House doesn't have to be sitting. During which time, the Prime Minister could announce a number of things. One, that he is going to resign, but that he will remain, which would be the only path that would have any precedent in Canada, as Prime Minister until a new leader was chosen and then an election was called. That's one possibility. He could resign and an interim Prime Minister could be announced and a leadership process could be put underway in that time. And that might be a path for both the Prime Minister somewhat recovering his legacy in the history books, and moving on, which, by the way, appears inevitable at this point. So while the country's in some chaos this morning, I'm not completely convinced that the Prime Minister and the people around him did not know that this is where we would be today.
Okay, look, before we go any further down to what might happen, it is the Canadian Jewish News Daily, and there are lots of Jewish angles to what happened in the last few days. The GST holiday has a very Jewish story, which we reported on because they made Hanukkah bushes and Hanukkah trees exempt, which is mind-boggling because it's not a thing. She thought it was lame and a gimmick, not over the GST Hanukkah bush, but that was one of the head-scratching things, part of the GST giveaway, which they cannot afford that because they have a $62 billion deficit. So she wasn't down for that. But the critics of Trudeau came out, and one of the loudest voices is a Montreal MP, Anthony Housefather. So, David, tell us about why Anthony is so loud against the party where he's now the representative for the Jewish community and fighting anti-Semitism, appointed by Trudeau.
First of all, I think we would want to together commend Anthony for his continued courage and leadership with respect to our Jewish community and its shared concerns across the country. Anthony is also a very seasoned politician, and it's been clear, despite that important nomination he got, that he has never been, and he would be the first to acknowledge it in private, I think, has never been on any short list for cabinet with this Prime Minister. Anthony is one way of exemplifying the depth of difficulty that the federal Liberal Party finds itself in that despite his enormous popularity in the riding, Anthony is in for a fight in the next election. So it demonstrates in some ways the kinds of cleavages we're seeing in the country right now. I would humbly submit, though, that his recent declaration regarding the Prime Minister is more about a political calculation, with the greatest respect, by Anthony. He's in a fight in the riding. Justin Trudeau is not popular, particularly within the Jewish community in the riding. The riding's bigger than that. So I would suggest that Anthony's message, which is part of politics, has to do with elections more than anything else. I don't for a second begrudge his clearly sincere belief that it's time for the Prime Minister to leave. But I think the announcement is a political calculation Anthony has made.
We should remind our listeners about his opposition. We're going to get into who's winning and who's losing here. Neil Oberman is running for the Conservatives in that riding, and he's been a bulldog for getting injunctions, right, for bubble legislation type of injunctions to protect the community. And he's had a lot of high-powered support. Melissa Lantsman's come down there. Who else has come to visit recently? Stephen Harper's come to visit to shore things up, right? So, and Polyev quite a bit.
Polyev has been in the riding as well. Yeah.
So you mentioned he's in trouble with the Jewish community, but in this cabinet shuffle, a Sephardi Canadian Jewish woman has now been appointed cabinet minister in the government. So it's Rachel Bendayan. Do we want to tell our listeners what we know about her and why she would take this job short term?
Interesting, because Rachel has been very clear in her expressed loyalty to the Prime Minister, which frankly has something to do with this cabinet shuffle today, perhaps. She is in a riding with a plurality of Jews, including a very substantial Hasidic community. And she is very connected to that community, as well as being a representative of the Sephardic Jewish community, which, of course, is a growing proportion of Quebec's Jewish community. Beyond that, I think we would all want to remember that today's cabinet shuffle is more important in its timing and in those names that are not there than in those who have been nominated, because it's a cabinet that was not announced on the day the Prime Minister would have announced it. If it was done in the way he had hoped to do it, one would have to, I think, believe in many of the media reports that would suggest that both Mr. Carney and perhaps the former Premier of BC, Christy Clark, would have been in it, and they're not. So this is not a cabinet that's significant with respect to those who were appointed, of course, not really significant with respect to the names that are in it, in my view.
Montreal's Jewish community has traditionally voted Liberal in history. And yet, in this turmoil, and also how Canada's Jews have been under attack anti-Semitically, and Canada's position on Israel, is it a shoe-in now that Poilievre is going to win the election because that's where all the Jews are going? Or are we going to still see support for Anthony because of traditional Jewish?
As far as Quebec is concerned, it should be remembered, unlike I gather some ridings in the GTA, there's no such thing as a riding in Quebec, a federal riding with a majority Jewish population. It should be remembered that in Anthony's riding, which includes the town of Mount Royal, major areas of Snowden-Côte-de-Neige, the majority population is not Jewish. And his is the riding with the largest concentration of Jews, including Rachel's. So we don't decide on our own as a community who wins. Anthony is deeply anchored as a former mayor of Côte-Saint-Luc, the major Jewish city, if you like, in the riding. The mayor of the other Jewish city, mainly Jewish city in the riding, Hampstead, Jeremy Levi, is very vocal in his support for the Conservative candidate. But it's got to be remembered that the riding's balance of power, if you will, with respect to its voter population, is not Jewish.
I'm not sure where the Jewish vote will go. And I do agree with David that Jews won't be deciding this election at all. I hear most Jews in my vicinity are swinging towards Poilievre. I see on Facebook groups that they're swinging towards Poilievre. I see how popular Melissa Lantsman is in the community. And then I hear the same things out of the US. I hear about so many Jews who wanted to vote for Trump and supported Trump. And then what came out of that was, despite how loud that kind of sentiment was, 79% of US Jews voted for Harris. So I doubt what I hear. And I'm not sure that the Jewish vote will go to Poilievre, because we didn't see that happening in the US, where I heard the exact same type of rhetoric that I see here. So I'm actually quite curious to see where it will go. And you can't play back a prediction for me next year because I don't have one.
Well, exactly. And I think it's worth remembering that we're in such a volatile time that we Jewish Canadians share, I'm sure, with all Canadians, some existential worries about pervasively difficult topics that touch us with a Jewish color on them, but touch us like all Canadians. Just a mundane poll result that I just looked at that reminds me of what a crazy place we're in. A Leger poll in Quebec showed that only 32% of Canadians supported the GST holiday. And think about it. When do Canadians say no to a tax cut, no matter how well conceived? And what I read from that is a fundamental concern about the kind of frivolity and expedience that seems to have been associated with these decisions on the GST cut, and a fundamental concern across Canada that our economy is in deep turmoil, that we're in the shadow of the imposition of a 25% tariff that could throw us into a recession, if not a depression. Environmental concerns are top of mind. And then you get to global security, and of course, our prime preoccupation within that in Israel and the territories in Gaza and so on. So we're in such an unstable time. I do think that most of us will go to the ballot box with concerns colored by who we are and where we come from, but that are bigger than the very major issues that have touched us as a Jewish community specifically.
Yeah, and I would add, if you look at this past summer's by-election in Toronto St. Paul's, where for the second time in 50 years, Conservatives have only held that seat for about 10, 11 years out of 50. It was a Liberal stronghold. It was one of the top 5 safest Liberal seats in all of Canada. It's interesting that Don Stewart was elected in that riding, but I think we also have to remember that, yes, the Jewish community came out and supported the Conservative candidate in Toronto St. Paul's, but the Liberal Party lost half the votes they had in 2021 to this by-election, and the NDP support was reduced in the by-election in a riding that 2 provincial elections in a row have returned an NDP MPP. And so I think there's more to it than just saying the Jewish numbers increased for one party. We're also seeing numbers decrease for the other, and people are staying home. And so we have to also look at how do we mobilize Canadians to come out and vote. It might be easier for members of different minority communities who can be convinced to vote on a single ballot issue to go support candidate A versus candidate B. But if you normally buy a dozen eggs every week and you can only afford 8 eggs, if you can't afford your mortgage payments or your rent and things like that, you're voting for the future of who you believe will return the economy and give you a hand up and help you. And right now, that's the ballot question. The ballot question is the economy. And, the advisors to President Bill Clinton 25, 30 years ago had it right when they said it's the economy, stupid. And that's what our next federal election will be based on. And so in ridings where you have a giant Jewish community like Thornhill that has the largest Jewish community of any riding in Canada, yes, Melissa Landsman will be overwhelmingly returned to that, but our community is not in 300 plus ridings across the country. And we need to ensure that the Jewish community, whether they be in Hamilton or Victoria or Toronto or Montreal or Halifax, come out
And I might be
vote.
able to offer something on that, because this is the first federal election where, unless something changes, I'm planning on handing my ballot back. Because
You can't say that. You're on the CJN political panel, and you can't do that. We're disqualifying you.
Well, as of right now, the only party that I feel safe with as a Jew is the Conservative Party. And because of everything else that I stand for, I can't pass my support that way. There is no one currently in a federal position that I could, in good conscience, put forward a vote for. And that is scary. And there are a lot of progressive voters like me. As we saw in the States, 79% voted the progressive candidate. And I don't see a good way forward for Jewish voters on the left right now. And that is more horrifying to me than almost anything else.
When you talk about the federal party where that you feel the most safe, I'm going to play you 2 clips. Polyev spent the year courting the Jewish community in Montreal, in Toronto, and he's been to London, Ontario. He's been everywhere courting the Jewish community. This is what he talks about.
We must destroy Hamas. We must return the hostages. And we know that the Jewish people, the Aboriginal people of Israel, who have been on the land for thousands of years, will be there thousands of years from now, celebrating Purim, celebrating Shabbat, celebrating Passover, and the voice and the echo will always go out, Am Israel Chai. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that was Polyev at a rally that I was at. And then you hear Trudeau saying this.
You relive it when the term Zionist is tossed around as a profanity, a label for something other than what it truly means. Believing in the right of Jewish people, like all people, to determine their own future, a right this government supports and always will. No one in Canada should ever be afraid to proudly call themselves a Zionist.
So that was Trudeau in Ottawa this past October for the 1-year anniversary of the October 7th.
Yeah, I mean, each is true to his style of speaking in that message with respect to what policy decisions, in their modesty. Let's remember, this is Canada and Israel is Israel, and our leverage is somewhat limited. Either of those statements could reflect eventual policy decisions that are the same as well within that sphere. That said, the rhetoric from Poilievre obviously sounds more passionate and resonates and reflects what I guess we'd agree is a general perception in our Jewish community that Poilievre is much more true to and clear on his support for Israel. Does it mean policies that are more meaningfully secure and interesting for Jewish Canadians and Jewish Canadians in their support for Israel? That to me is an open question.
Yeah, I think what we've seen both in the United States in the most recent presidential election, where you had Vice President Harris say one thing in ads in Michigan and another thing in ads in New York or Pennsylvania on the same topic, and what we've seen in Canada is not just what Monsieur Poilievre said to a very friendly audience and what the Prime Minister said to the Jewish community. The issue is, are politicians saying the same things to different communities? And what we have seen the Conservative Party do is keep the same message across the board. That can't be said for the other opposition parties and for the Liberal Party of Canada. And so that's the big difference. Different faith and cultural communities across Canada have wised up to the fact that politicians at times over the last number of decades have said one thing to Group A and something else to Group B on the same topic. And that's really what I'm interested to see how it plays out. But let's not forget, we're also seeing that within the Muslim community. We're seeing the Muslim community hearing that message A is being said to the Jewish community and message B is being said to them, mainly by the Prime Minister and members of his cabinet right now.
Right. I have a tape clip I'm going to play of Melanie Joly basically taking the hard stance against Israel with UNRWA. This was the March 18th big vote, which is a huge political issue, one of the big stories of the year, which we should remember, where keffiyehs were seen in the House of Commons. Anthony was going to quit. Then they voted to continue funding UNRWA, continue arms embargo against Israel. When you hear Melanie Joly speak, that's the two different messages. Trudeau's all, puppies and unicorns for the Jewish community, and then he sends out his foreign minister to do the dirty work, who, don't forget, went to Ramallah and shook hands with Mahmoud Abbas, with Yara Sachs, which we need to talk about in a second. I'll just play that tape.
Tonight we were able to work all together and to find common ground as we are witnessing a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. And Canadians have been very concerned about this humanitarian situation, and that is why it was important to find a large consensus working with many parliamentarians to make sure that we would be sending an important message to the world, but at the same time also that we could show that Canadians can be united on this issue.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone is going to disagree that there is a big crisis in Gaza. There's a disagreement on what the solution to that crisis is. And a lot of people say Israel should stand down, and we know what that means. We know that that means repeats of October 7th again and again and again, because that's what Hamas has promised. And there are many people who say we should resolve the crisis in Gaza by Hamas stepping down. So,
right, but it's like they have two Islamophobia and anti-Semitism report coming out on the same day. Did you know they were doing an anti-Islamophobia study at the House of Commons Committee? I never heard about it. We never knew that. It was kept completely silent.
I have yet to hear of anything come forward on anti-Semitism that doesn't say Islamophobia in the next breath. So I would have been shocked if that report hadn't come out, whether I heard about it or not.
Yeah, which is very equivocal and disappointing and amoral leadership, without a doubt. That said, this is not a knock at Pierre Poilievre, but official opposition politics are much, much easier than running the country. And should, as looks likely, Pierre Poilievre become the Prime Minister of Canada, people are not going to be playing clips with any effect about what he said a year ago, when his policies inevitably, bumped around by the difficult and messy realities of international politics and Canada's obligations on the world stage are less clear and unequivocal.
And of course, an item that will play heavily in Quebec is the language law. Poilievre voted not to get involved in the Bill 21 issue, right? And not to oppose it, which is crimps rights for English language minorities in Quebec. And Bill 96 too, they let their hands go off of it. So how now they put Rachel Bendayan as Minister of Official Languages. What does that tell you?
Yes, I was going to say, again, I would minimize the significance on the ground in terms of coming government decisions of this cabinet shuffle. We're in so much of a bigger mess. But that is perhaps interesting and hopeful for Quebec's Jewish community and the majority of it that lives in, that speaks English as its main language in Quebec, because federal guarantees are important. That said, and I've been in the middle of it as a former English-speaking MNA and as a former executive director of Alliance Quebec, one of the major groups that represented our English-speaking community. Our history over the past half century is littered by events where we saw the federal government somewhat abandon us as a community. So you'll continue to see, I expect, the federal policy of, except for the most jagged edges, non-intervention with respect to François Legault's government and its handling or mishandling of language issues in Quebec. So it's hopeful that there's someone from our community in that file. Will she choose to or be allowed to exercise a grand marge de manœuvre in a way that protects and defends our English-speaking community and the Jewish component therein? I wouldn't bet on that margin being very big.
Yeah, she might have the shortest lifespan job, except for Kim Campbell, maybe. You never know, right? By January 27th, they might be done.
There are some parallels there, I think, yeah.
Except just to comment, Prime Minister Campbell was in office from June to November with an election in between. So it will be one of the shortest tenures of potentially. But, Prime Minister Clark and Prime Minister Campbell still have doubled and tripled what this cabinet could see.
We talked about Rachel Bendayan. Let's go through the Jewish MPs and their political futures. Is Yara Sachs, in terms of her, how do you feel after her shaking hands with Mahmoud Abbas? Is her political career is done in terms of the Jewish community, or is she going to get reelected?
I don't
versus Roman Baber.
I don't think enough.
Fight of her life to try to hold that riding. She will need help inside the riding and from across Canada to keep that seat. And if you look at the polling numbers that are out there right now, I don't see her being reelected in that riding. I don't see it being close. I don't know if there are the boots on the ground to put in that riding versus some other Toronto area ridings that the party will try to hold. When you get to an election time, parties rank the seats from the most winnable to the least winnable. Toronto St. Paul's was always in one of the top 5 most winnable seats for the Liberal Party of Canada, meaning the local candidate could travel the country to help other candidates. I don't see a GTHA riding being in the top 5 safest seats for any Liberal candidate in an election when it happens.
What about Julie Daberson? She voted with her government against Israel. She was with her party on March 18th. So is she done and Toronto done for it?
So here's the thing. In general, people do not pay as much attention to politics as we here in this room. And that includes everyone, including Jews. And so I just don't know that people are following their careers closely enough to be able to catch the picture of Yara Sachs, to catch the way that they vote, because I just don't think the average person off the street, whether they're Jewish or otherwise, is paying that much attention. So I think they'll get the support from the Jewish community that they normally would, because it takes a lot of attention to detail to catch those details.
And to add, when you're looking at Toronto and Ontario ridings, there are certain ridings where the play will be between the Conservatives and the Liberals. York Centre, where Yara Sachs is the MP. Then there are ridings like Toronto Danforth and others that are historic NDP Liberal fights. And to be very honest, the Conservatives have not been in play in those ridings for decades. And so now the local voters there will make the determination, are they NDP supporters? Are they Liberal supporters? What are they going to do? That's a bit of a different game, as I say, than the York Centre and Minister Sachs versus Roman Baber, where it is a Tory Liberal fight where it looks overwhelmingly that it will return to the Conservative benches.
Could be also Marco Mendicino and Karen Stintz. He's a beloved MP, very pro-Israel, Italian, former cabinet minister, also bumped. Karen Stintz doesn't have big support in that riding, so it may not.
Well, she does. Karen,
because she was a city councilor.
represented that riding as a city councilor. She was the chair of the Toronto Transit Commission. She also ran for mayor in 2014 and is very well known. That is a liberal conservative fight where it's going to determine who gets the vote out on election day and in the advanced polls. And as Emma said earlier, if people don't like either candidate, do they refuse the ballot? What do they do? Do they spoil the ballot? And how does that play in certain ridings?
Tamara Coronis is running for the PCs in Nanaimo, former Toronto human rights lawyer, and she's now moved to north part of Vancouver Island. She's one to watch in the next election for sure.
And I hope she does win. I'm going to be partisan here. I've known her my whole life. She's a dear friend. Her father, Oliver Shulam, was a giant organizer in the Toronto area for the Conservatives. She's literally the type of person our community needs in the House of Commons.
I want to play a tape from Emma. You said this last year, and it struck me.
I think in the beginning of 2024, the story is still going to be the war. But I think it may shift to be more on the impacts of the war here. There's been a lot of anti-Semitism. Cases have risen. My daughter's school bus, someone was chanting Hitler. There's been a lot going on, and I think we're going to see a lot more of those stories start to come. But I think the war is going to continue to be the focus for our community leading into 2024, and frankly, as long as it lasts.
Nobody expected this year to be the anti-Semitism level, the numbers, the statistics of anti-Semitism, 900 police reported anti-Semitism, hate crimes in 2023. I'm scared to see the numbers come out when they're ready in 2024. Montreal, I can't believe that there were only 42 people charged since October 7th with with crimes related to the protests. In Toronto, it's about 160 people with 400 charges. Let me start with you, Emma, because it affected you directly. Is the government's measures to tackle anti-Semitism, and I'm saying government in the three levels because federal, provincial, and municipal, they all have a role. Is that been a big story this year?
No.
And
no, it hasn't.
They've spent millions on anti-racism, and I'm going to interrupt you. And adding police to the hate crimes unit, extra bodies, training, all this effort, Holocaust education, all these things that's going on, bubble legislation.
So I still think most of it is related to the war because people love to say anti-Zionist when what they mean is anti-Jew. So I still think a lot of the anti-Semitism comes through the war, even if it's only tangentially related. But we are seeing a lot of hate crimes. We just talked about the third shooting at Bias Mushka. Whitby, which is a city near where I live, had a 6-foot swastika burned into the grass. At that point, the mayor pulled a lot of the Jewish community into town hall for a meeting to chat about our concerns and what was going on there, and didn't even publicize it because they were worried about the protests that might have come outside town hall if word had gotten out that we were in there listening to the Jewish community. There's been graffiti popping up all over Pickering, where I live, comparing Zionists and Israel to Hitler and the Nazis. And these things are going on everywhere. But what I think about those is that as soon as it has a swastika, as soon as it says Nazi, it becomes a hate crime. Whereas so many things that are really anti-Semitic don't get counted as hate crimes because the criminal code, the definition of anti-Semitism, is so closely tied to the Holocaust that it makes it really difficult for police to charge anyone with a hate crime because of how narrow that definition is. And I think until the federal government makes some changes to the criminal code, which I know they're considering doing, but I don't know that anti-Semitism is going to be a huge part of that. But until that definition is broadened, it becomes really challenging for anyone to do anything about it.
I need to bring David in next because your city just got the second time around for the West Island getting firebombed in Dollard.
It's deeply demoralizing and worrisome. I mean, we always know that life goes on and we're not under siege. And in a sadly passive way, I think 9.5 out of 10 of our fellow citizens who are non-Jewish deplore these acts when they see them, but in a sadly passive and often rather disinterested and non-empathic way. The two legacies that I find the saddest about these are, first of all, the double standard so often in place when we evaluate Israel's behavior on a world stage and everything that comes down from that in a deeply simplistic and angry and frankly often anti-Semitic way, as opposed to our collective reactions to other perceived injustices in the world.
Like, what is happening? And what can a government, federal, provincial, or municipal do, or aren't they doing?
Well, and it's a checkerboard. The Mayor Outremont equivocations have been very disappointing, and her lack of serious action on the long-standing and violent and overwrought Palestinian protests at McGill was not at all consonant with what should have been done. In counterpoint, the Premier, frankly, has been quite clear in his language and gone as far as he can as a Premier in urging police authorities to act more quickly. Very thoughtful and direct and clear Montreal police chief has said all the right things and done many of the right things with respect to enhanced training and deployment of police against acts of anti-Semitism. So that's been something of an encouraging story. I think it's important to note, I'm not a fan of his, but that Monsieur Blanchette, the chef of the Bloc Québécois, is the one who proposed the resolution deploring the despicable terrorist plots against Erwin Kotler, for instance. Our community needs to hear those kinds of statements from the people around us that suggest that they share our concern and our insecurity. And those statements don't come as often as they should. I would not get the sense that that dynamic, that sad dynamic, is any worse in Quebec than anywhere else in the country, though.
I don't know about that. Okay, we have one thing I want to bring in before we end, and that is last year you made predictions. The year before, I'm going to play David's prediction, and then we'll see what are we going to see in early January. We can only go that far. We can't go farther because there's a lot on the table January 27th or before. So let me play this.
I agree that the war will be obviously tragically top of mind. I think the shadow of our southern neighbor will start to cover more sunlight as months go on. We're not that far away from, having the world's largest democracy continue to operate on absurd and sort of mind-bending parameters, which, have a very possible future president, wearing pinstripe pajamas as he goes to his inauguration. I mean, it's just such a weird situation that'll continue to take up a lot of room, including, I think, increasing room on the issue we're talking about. The Americans are being quite public about setting conditions on their continued and crucial financial and defense support to Israel. So I think that story is going to get bigger.
Okay, so do we give him 50% on his prediction? 60%? He got elected and nothing happened to him. David, you talked about Trump and his oversized influence on Canada and world politics. Let's talk about where you think that will go. Good or bad for Jews, good or bad for Israel, good or bad for Canada?
Yeah. Well, I would say across the board, bad. I would start with the economic shadows over all of us pending Donald Trump's inauguration in a month from yesterday. I think that crosses community, religious, racial lines and has us all deeply worried and vulnerable, and rightly so. I would say bad because I see no coherence or realism in Donald Trump's positioning on the Middle East. He says he'll solve the other conflict, Ukraine, maybe even before January 20th. I don't expect he would make the same promise as far as the Middle East is concerned. And given the geopolitics and the terribly complicated issues that impose themselves with respect to Israel's future in the Middle East, I don't have any confidence that Donald Trump's election will bring us any further stability there. With respect to the level of anti-Semitism in the country, I don't know how one can feel more hopeful. I think our community has done everything it can to sensitize every level of government to the importance of unequivocal action and clarity in deploring anti-Semitism, and not waiting for a parallel with respect to Islamophobia before taking action. What has to happen to improve responses to it? I honestly don't know. I think it would be tough for any of us to predict a year of less volatility. I so sincerely hope it will be, but I can only say I don't know to what awaits us in the coming year.
I mean, I can add on to that. Obviously, as a progressive, I think Trump is disastrous. But beyond that, I think Trump is a sledgehammer. And I think what the Middle East needs is negotiation, nuance. I don't think either the Israelis or the Palestinians are right or wrong. I think there's a lot of gray area in between the two. And you'll note I didn't say Hamas, I said Palestinians, and I said that very deliberately. You know, there are talks about a ceasefire right now, and I hope those go through, because I think if Trump comes in and just smashes Gaza, I don't think that does anyone any favors. As far as local predictions go, I think that people have learned over the past year and a half that it is okay to be anti-Semitic as long as you don't say the word Jew. And I don't see that getting better even when the war settles. I think people have, it's the oldest bigotry in the world, and I think we're on a downward skew that makes me scared and uncomfortable. And that's why, to me, it's so important that Israel exists, so that if things really slide downhill here, there's always somewhere that I know is safe to go. And I have no interest in moving to Israel, and I hope I never have to do that. But things don't look good here, and I'm pessimistic, but I'm not sure I see them getting better in the near future.
Yeah, with regards to President-elect Trump, soon-to-be President Trump, if the president is able to expand the Abraham Accords, it will be good for the region, for the state of Israel, and for the Arab and Muslim and Christian communities in the Middle East as well. We need the United States to take a leadership position on the world stage, something that has been lacking for the last while, and I'm hopeful that a leadership position can return. Looking domestically, I'm really...
Forget it, I'm going to play this back for you next year.
I know you are. Oh, I know you are. Looking domestically, I'm getting tired of a firebombing of a synagogue, a flame attack, as one media outlet called it recently. I'm getting tired of anti-Semitic events followed immediately by the greatest press releases we have ever seen and no action. While I would like to see laws changed, I would like to see existing laws enforced. Period. Full stop. And so we need to see existing federal, provincial, and municipal pieces of legislation enforced to assist not just the Jewish community, but all vulnerable communities. From a political point of view, we've seen the premiers over the last while stand up and take leadership positions for Canada domestically and internationally. When Bill Davis was premier in the 80s, he was Captain Canada. He led the train of federation on numerous things. I was happy to see the Premier of Ontario and the Premier of Quebec walking in lockstep with how to deal with 25% tariffs and other issues. To me, that is something good to see. I think we all can agree that we're heading towards a federal election very, very soon. The train hasn't left the station, and that's my prediction. We're going to see federal, provincial elections continue, but so that everything isn't doom and gloom. I was at my 3-year-old's Hanukkah recital with his full school, and it was amazing seeing the pride in Israel and in Judaism with these 3-year-olds to 12-year-olds, etc. And that's what gives me hope right now, that no matter how bad things can be outside the doors, the next generation, they're going to be okay. They need help from us as the adults, but they're going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. Nice thought to end on.
Yeah. Listen, it's been an honor to have you back for what's been a horrible, terrible, it's not just a year, it's 14 months. And I hope next year we can talk about fun things like, will the Nazi names of the Deschênes Commission ever be released? That was the biggest scandal we had before October 7th. Remember that?
Yeah,
We'll see.
absolutely.
We'll have a book club instead of a political panel. Let's hope. Jewish Book Club. Thank you so much. Happy New Year. And we'll talk to you again. All the best.
All the very best to all of you. That was fun.
Happy Hanukkah.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. The Daily is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and the music is by Dov Beck-Levine. As always, thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Avi Feingold. I'm the co-host of Bonjour Chai on the CJN Podcast Network and a contributing editor for the CJN magazine. Bonjour Chai is Canada's weekly Jewish discussion and debate podcast. We discuss the issues that are important to Jewish Canadians. The stereotype of Canadians is that we either all agree with each other or we disagree and we don't want to talk about it and we don't fight and we don't argue. We do our thing quietly and off to the side. And it's not always true. I like to think that Canadian Jews have strong disagreements, but that are respectful about it. I think historically that has been the case. And hearing two people disagree in a loving, friendly, idea-based sort of way, hopefully is a model for other people to have these conversations themselves. And I think it's important for people to be able to hear these things. We can't do this without your support. Your donation goes a long way to helping us bring you the stories that you want to hear. Please visit thecjn.ca/donate. And if you're Canadian, you can even get a tax receipt.